The case of Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell, doomsday spouses. Crimes motivated by religious beliefs are not uncommon in criminal practice. Statistics show that every year, worldwide, over 100,000 people fall victim to religious fanatics. Often these victims do not share the fanatics' orthodox views. The case of the deranged duo, Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell, shook the world a few years ago and remains unresolved to this day. This story has been covered in media outlets across various countries, shocking and baffling people. It's a tale entwined with corrupt passion, belief in one's own exceptionalism, greed, and a complete lack of moral principles. 5 members of their own families, including 2 children, fell victim to this couple. Currently, the legal proceedings against the spouses from hell, as the press has dubbed them, are still ongoing. They face capital punishment for their heinous acts. However, they not only deny their guilt, but also seriously hope to escape punishment or receive minimal sentences. But let's start from the beginning and try to unravel this horrifying and complex story, an attempt to understand how people who claim to have found God completely lost their humanity. Who is Chad Daybell, and how did he become a leader of a religious movement? Chad Guy Daybell was born on August 11, 1968, in the small town of Provo, Utah, located 18 miles south of Salt Lake City. He grew up in a simple, even humble family, and was a quiet, shy child. Chad was an average student in school, without any notable talents or athletic achievements, and he was self-conscious about his weight. After finishing high school, Chad, not without difficulty, enrolled at Brigham Young University, BYU, in Utah, graduating in 1992 with a bachelor's degree in journalism. During his college years, he married a modest girl named Tamara, or simply Tammy Douglas. The couple quickly had 5 children, sons Seth, Mark, and Garth, and daughters Emma and Leah. After completing his studies, the young father worked as an editor at a local daily newspaper. However, due to the family's constant financial struggles, he also worked as a night watchman at a small church and as a gravedigger at the cemetery next to it. Since Tammy did not work outside the home and focused solely on household chores and raising their children, the family barely made ends meet. At one point, Chad decided to use his journalism education to write his own religious-themed book. His first work was published in 1999 and resembled a collection of religious stories or religious-themed fantasy. Surprisingly, the book became a hit, earning him a decent amount of money. Chad immediately quit his jobs at the cemetery and the newspaper to focus on his writing career. About a year and a half later, he published a book titled 1 Foot in the Grave. This was a popular science work in which he described his experiences as a gravedigger, pondered death, the afterlife, and soul reincarnations. In 2004, Daybell founded his own book company, Spring Creek, which he used to self-publish his works. These works discussed his beliefs about the impending end of the world, Judgment Day, and more. Some say that over the years, Chad's religious beliefs became more extreme. Chad Daybell published dozens of fiction and popular science books infused with religious themes. He began to conduct podcasts, audio, and video lectures aimed at helping people prepare for the second coming of Christ. Chad called himself an apocalyptic writer and claimed he could see the future, hearing voices of the deceased giving prophecies meant only for him. The Story of Lori Vallow, Biography, Early Marriages, Children. Lori Ryan Vallow, née Cox, was born on June 26, 1973, in the picturesque city of Loma Linda, California. She grew up in a large family, alongside 2 older brothers and 3 sisters. Her parents, Denise and Barry Cox, worked tirelessly to provide for their many children. From an early age, Lori was particularly close to her brother Alex, with whom she shared a trusting relationship. He always stood up for his little sister and protected her. Even in her school years, Lori became a true beauty, with no shortage of admirers. An attractive, charismatic blonde with a slender figure and a captivating smile, she loved being the center of attention, and was a spirited and adventurous person. In the spring of 1992, at the age of 18, Lori married her high school sweetheart Nelson Yanes, with whom she had started a relationship in her senior year. However, the young couple soon realized they had rushed into marriage and were not ready for family life, leading to the dissolution of their marriage in less than a year. They did not have any children together. In the fall of 1995, Lori remarried, this time to a man named William LaJoya. A year later, the couple had a son, Colby, but their marriage ended in 1998, just 2 years later. The boy remained in his mother's custody. In early 2001, Lori entered into her third marriage with Joseph Anthony Ryan, who officially adopted her son from her previous marriage. A year later, the couple welcomed a daughter, Tylee, but this marriage too collapsed in 2005. Notably, soon after her divorce from Joseph, an incident occurred when her ex-husband came to visit the children. He was assaulted by Lori's brother, Alex, who claimed in court that he was defending his sister's honor, as Ryan had insulted her. As a result, Cox was sentenced to a fine and a short prison term. Marriage to Charles Vallow. Soon after divorcing her third husband, Lori met a man named Charles Anthony Vallow, whom she married in February 2006. He was 17 years her senior, but this significant age difference did not pose an obstacle for them. Charles had been previously married and had 2 teenage sons from his past relationships, Zachary and Nicholas. The couple initially lived in Nevada with Lori's children from her previous marriages, while Charles's sons visited during holidays or weekends. Charles owned a small business that provided a stable income to support the family. Lori, who had not pursued further education, did not work, but her husband never reproached her for it. In 2014, the couple officially adopted a young boy named Joshua Jackson, or simply JJ Vallow, who was Charles's grandnephew. JJ had autism and required expensive therapy, which his relative could provide. Towards the end of 2014, the family decided to move to the Hawaiian Islands, specifically to the island of Kauai. By this time, Colby, as well as Charles's older children, were adults living independently, so the Vallow family moved to the island as a group of 4, Lori, Charles, Tylee, and JJ. The family settled in a popular tourist area, deciding to open their own beach bar specializing in fresh juices, smoothies, refreshing drinks, and non-alcoholic cocktails. Despite all their efforts, the availability of raw materials, and Charles's experience in trade, the business quickly failed due to intense competition. Around this time, Lori became interested in religious literature and was particularly drawn to a series of books titled Standing in Holy Places by the aforementioned Chad Daybell. She became so captivated by the occult writer's views and thoughts that she became almost obsessed with his ideas. She purchased all his works and read them daily. The meeting of Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell. In 2016, the family was forced to leave Hawaii and return to the mainland. They settled in Arizona, and while Charles worked hard to provide for the family, his wife Lori increasingly immersed herself in religion, drifting away from reality. In October 2018, Lori and her close friend Melanie attended an event in a neighboring town called Preparing People for the Second Coming of Christ, led by Chad Daybell. As a devoted fan and follower, Lori was thrilled at the opportunity to meet him in person. Lori sat in the front row, her eyes fixed on Chad. He also noticed the attractive blonde, and after the event, when the writer and religious speaker decided to personally engage with his followers, Lori, as expected, stayed behind. She hung on his every word and asked if she could touch his hand. After doing so, Daybell looked into her eyes and said that they had been husband and wife in 7 previous reincarnations. Chad and Lori exchanged contact information and began communicating daily. A few weeks later, when Lori's husband went to Nevada for work, she invited the preacher to hold a gathering at her home. That day, about a dozen people gathered at the Vallow house, discussing God, the Judgment Day, and the Second Coming. Lori and Chad also agreed to collaborate on preparing people for the dreadful judgment. The pair started conducting podcasts dedicated to this event, leading sermons and writing articles. Lori became increasingly detached from reality and her family, but Charles, unfortunately, did not immediately notice this change. He thought it was a temporary obsession and would soon wear off. By the time he realized how far things had gone, it was already too late. Soon, Lori began talking about dark spirits and zombies, telling family and friends that she was chosen by God for a special mission. Part of this mission involved destroying the spirits of darkness, demons, and all evil. Charles's attempts to bring his wife back to reality failed, and more so, she began to see him as one of the dark entities that needed to be destroyed. The tragic end of Charles Vallow. By the end of 2018, the marriage between Lori and Charles Vallow was on the brink of collapse. In February 2019, during Charles's week-long business trip, Lori changed all the locks in their shared home. Upon his return, Charles found himself locked out of his own house, noticed his personal car, the family truck missing, and discovered that a substantial amount of $35,000 had been withdrawn from his account. Charles loudly called out for his wife and tried to enter the house. Lori, in a frenzied state, rushed outside, hurling threats and curses. She screamed that her husband's soul had long died, his body possessed by a demon, repeatedly exclaiming, "I don't know who you are and what you've done with my husband." Without hesitation, Charles went to the police station and reported Lori for theft, obstruction to his home and children. He expressed concerns about her threats of physical harm against him, leading to the issuance of a protective order prohibiting Lori from approaching him. The statements Charles made that evening were recorded, a standard procedure. He spoke about his wife's excessive religious fervor, her belief in an imminent end of the world, and her tendency to classify people as either light or demonic beings. The officers, while asking clarifying questions, openly mocked him, but still issued the protective order. The very next day, Charles filed for divorce and changed the beneficiary of his $1 million life insurance policy from Lori to his mother and sister. His lawyers stated that Charles was concerned about the well-being of JJ, who required special care. He knew his mother and sister would responsibly manage the insurance payout and take care of the boy in case anything happened to him. As for Tylee, her stepfather had not legally adopted her and couldn't include the legally unrelated minor in the documents. A few months later, Mr. Vallow made the fateful mistake of revoking the protective order, hoping to reconcile with Lori and save their marriage. He began visiting his ex-wife's home, missing the children, and still hopeful of family reconciliation. On July 11, 2019, Charles was fatally shot twice in the chest when he arrived to see his children. Alex Cox, Lori's brother, called emergency services and confessed to the shooting. He claimed self-defense, alleging that Charles attacked him first with a baseball bat. In response, he drew a pistol and fired twice without aiming. The incident was witnessed by the homeowner and children. Their testimonies were somewhat consistent, and the court ruled the incident as an unintentional killing in self-defense. Notably, Alex's head injury was minor, despite Charles's background as a former baseball player capable of inflicting severe harm with a bat. The same day Charles's body was taken to the morgue, Lori threw a party at the house with music, numerous guests, and a poolside disco, right where her husband had been shot and where traces of blood were still visible. She didn't arrange for his funeral or inform anyone about the incident. Charles's sons, mother, sister, and other relatives only learned about his death a week later, when his unclaimed body was still in the morgue. A series of mysterious disappearances and fatalities. Shortly after her husband's demise, Lori sold their Arizona home and, along with her children, relocated to a town called Rexburg in Idaho, settling close to where Chad and his wife Tammy lived. Alex Cox, Lori's brother, moved with his sister and settled in the same housing complex. Lori enrolled her son in a school for children with special needs, but her 16-year-old daughter Tylee did not attend any educational institution. She was seldom seen outside, leading many neighbors to remain unaware of the second child's existence. Around the same time, Lori referred to her daughter as a dark entity in a phone conversation with a friend. On September 8, 2019, the children, their mother, and Uncle Alex went to Yellowstone Park, where Chad Daybell joined them. Several photographs from that trip showed Tylee, but after that day, she was never seen alive again. On September 24th of the same year, Lori withdrew her son's documents from the school, claiming he would henceforth be homeschooled. The 7-year-old boy was also not seen afterward. Less than a month later, on October 19th, Chad's 49-year-old wife, Tammy, passed away suddenly. According to Chad, she had a cold with a cough and presumably died from respiratory failure in her sleep. With no signs of violence on her body, her death was ruled natural. Chad categorically refused an autopsy to definitively determine the cause, a decision that oddly raised no suspicions. Following his wife's sudden passing, Chad received approximately $500,000 in insurance payouts. 2 weeks later, Chad and Lori traveled to the Hawaiian Islands, where they officially married in a beachside ceremony. This event came as a total shock and surprise to Daybell's children, who were still mourning their mother and couldn't comprehend their father's actions. Upon returning to Arizona, the couple lived together and misled others by claiming Lori's children were with relatives, or even asserting she had no children at all. They also rented a small unit at a local storage facility, where they later moved all the belongings of the children as if they never existed in the home. Another month later, on December 12, 2019, Alex Cox died suddenly in his home. The cause of death appeared to be a heart attack, but at his sister's insistence, no autopsy was conducted, and the incident was deemed natural. Investigation, arrest, and horrific discoveries. As time passed, more people persistently questioned Lori about the whereabouts of her children. She skillfully lied to neighbors and acquaintances, but it was more complicated with relatives. Her eldest son, Colby, who had little contact with his mother after moving away, tried earnestly to reach his younger sister. Initially, Lori answered from her daughter's phone, pretending to be Tylee, but Colby soon sensed something was amiss. Meanwhile, Charles's relatives demanded access to JJ. They wanted to take the boy for holidays or weekends or simply talk to him on the phone, but Lori consistently refused or made up absurd excuses. Eventually, the boy's grandmother reported his disappearance to the police, and soon after, Colby also approached the police to find his younger sister. When law enforcement officers knocked on Lori's door and asked her to bring the children for a conversation, she lied that they were visiting relatives. This information proved false, and the police returned to her home. They gave her a week to appear at the police station with the children, but instead, she and her husband fled to Hawaii again. On February 20th, 2020, Lori was arrested on the island of Kauai and taken back to Arizona. A search was conducted in her and Chad's home, but neither the children nor any signs that they had been there were found. Now her husband Chad, who had been defending her and insisting she had no children, was also under suspicion. It was only on June 9th that police discovered human remains buried in the backyard of the couple's home. Forensic analysis revealed that they were the bodies of the missing Tylee and her younger brother JJ. Chad was immediately detained for concealing evidence and complicity. The authorities then decided to exhume the bodies of Tammy Daybell and Alex Cox to establish the true causes of their deaths. In both cases, traces of chemicals capable of inducing heart failure were found, leading to the conclusion that these individuals did not die naturally. The trial process. The trial of the spouses commenced in January 2021. They faced charges of conspiring to commit first-degree criminal acts, grand theft through deceit, and insurance fraud. Moreover, the demise of Charles Vallow was reclassified from self-defense to premeditated criminal action. Witnesses testifying in court stated that Lori referred to her children as dark entities and promised to save their souls. There were speculations that the deaths of 16-year-old Tylee and 7-year-old JJ might have had ritualistic elements. Notably, the adolescent girl's body was partially burned. Weeks before, Chad had sent Lori an email rating people, where he assigned Tylee a 2 as a dark spirit. Given the totality of the charges, both spouses faced the possibility of capital punishment. However, in May 2021, Vallow's defense team succeeded in having her declared incompetent, halting the trial process. Simultaneously, all 5 of Daybell's adult children insist on their father's innocence, believing he was framed by Lori and Alex. In 2022, after treatment in a psychiatric facility, Vallow was again deemed fit to stand trial and answer for her actions. In March 2023, the judge ruled out capital punishment as a sentence for the woman, a decision the prosecution is still attempting to contest. In July of the same year, She was sentenced to life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. The trial against Chad continues, and he still faces the prospect of capital punishment. It is worth noting that this story inspired the book When the Moon Turns to Blood by investigative journalist Lily Sotail, as well as a 2021 television movie by Lifetime Movie Network titled Doomsday Mom, The Lori Vallow Story, starring Lauren Lee Smith. In addition, Netflix released a 3-part documentary series in 2022 called Sins of Our Mother, which includes an episode dedicated to Lori's eldest child, her son Colby. The dark mystery of the disappearances solved 14 years later. Investigating certain crimes can take years or even decades due to a lack of evidence or witnesses. Sometimes investigations are intentionally misled to create confusion or send investigators down the wrong path. Many such cases eventually end up on the shelves of archives as unresolved. However, crimes involving life-ending actions and abuses of various degrees of severity generally have no statute of limitations, and investigations can be reopened at any time when new information surfaces. Cases related to the disappearance of individuals, particularly minors, are often solved on hot tracks. It is believed that the first 3 days are critical when there is a high likelihood of finding the person alive. Thereafter, the chances of a favorable outcome rapidly diminish. The case of the missing German schoolgirl from Berlin, Georgina Krueger, was investigated for over 10 years and was considered one of the most mysterious in the history of German criminology. The girl disappeared during the day on her way home from school, having traveled just a few dozen meters from her home. No evidence, leads, or witnesses were found, and although the investigation was periodically reopened, there was little hope of solving the crime. However, thanks to meticulous work by undercover agents, the criminal was eventually exposed. What is known about Georgina Krueger and her family? Georgina, or simply Gina Krueger, was born on April 11, 1992, in Munich, and was the middle child of 3 in a simple family. She grew up with her older brother Tommy, who was 8 years her senior, and her younger sister Michelle, who was 2.5 years her junior. When Gina turned 11, her parents decided to separate, and her older brother, who was then 19, chose to live with their father. After the divorce, the girls were primarily raised by their mother Vesma and their grandmother on their mother's side. Both girls did well in school, were involved in music and dance, and were creative by nature. The family lived modestly, and while their father maintained contact with his ex-wife and daughters, he was more focused on supporting his elder son, whom he funded through school and supported in various ways. In June 2006, Vesna moved with her mother and daughters to Berlin, where she had been offered a well-paying job. The family settled in the Moabit district at house number 8 on Stendal Street. On September 1st, the sisters attended one of the best local schools, which, although located in a different district, was accessible by bus. Vesna was very pleased with her new job and had big plans for the future. But soon the peaceful and measured life of the family was shattered. She dreamed of becoming an actress. From childhood, Gina loved to sing and dance, engaging in these activities seriously and with full dedication. Inspired by Indian films, she dreamed of an acting career and enthusiastically participated in school theater, as well as attending acting and stage speech courses. Teachers working with young Krueger noted that she definitely possessed the necessary talents, and thus predicted her future success and fame. Moreover, the girl had a bright, expressive appearance, a slender feminine figure, and was quite tall for her age. She took meticulous care of herself, keeping up with fashion trends, striving to dress stylishly, and used decorative cosmetics skillfully and intelligently. It's worth noting that Georgina applied makeup as well as professional makeup artists, often doing makeup for her friends and neighbors back in Munich. In Berlin, during the summer holidays, she actively attended various castings, trying to break into the big screen or television. She managed to appear in crowd scenes a few times, but these were very inconspicuous episodes. However, on Friday, September 22nd, 2006, luck finally smiled at her. She auditioned for a guest role in the television series, Turkish for Beginners, and her candidacy was approved. Gina was supposed to receive a call back on Monday, September 25th, to finalize her inclusion in the cast, discuss details, and invite her to sign a contract. The new beauty in town. In her new school, the young beauty caused a real stir from the first day, capturing the attention of all the boys in her class. However, she struggled to get along with the girls as they openly envied her and saw her as a competitor. Her classmates were slow to accept her into their group and communicated with her reluctantly, although Gina was sociable, friendly, and open, avoided conflicts, and tried to interact with all the kids in the class. The teenage girl was indeed very beautiful, danced well, sang, and even received an offer from a modeling agency to try herself as a photo model. She agreed, but unfortunately, she never made it to the planned photo session in early October. Gina dreamed that one day she would make it to Hollywood or Bollywood, where she would act in movies. She imagined herself on the red carpets of prestigious film festivals, among celebrities, dreaming of fame, recognition, film awards, and was ready to work hard on herself to achieve her desires. The schoolgirl almost made it happen, when suddenly she disappeared without a trace, a few miles from home. So the schoolgirl was awaiting confirmation of her role in the TV series, and she had no doubts about it. All weekend, Georgina could think of nothing else but the upcoming call from the studio, which was set to decide her fate. She was excited and inspired, already imagining herself on set and working on her lines. On Monday, September 25th, as usual, she headed to school in the morning. She was supposed to return home by 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and since the call was expected in the late afternoon, Gina asked her grandmother to answer all calls, promising not to linger anywhere. The day dragged on endlessly for Krueger. Her classmates noticed that she seemed tense, constantly checking the time, and unable to focus on her lessons. Since she hadn't told anyone about her participation in the casting, her anxious state was interpreted differently by everyone. When school ended, Georgina, having gathered her belongings, hurried to the nearest bus stop, got on bus number 27, which she rode daily, and headed home. After traveling 3 stops, she got off at Rue Retenover, which was a short distance from her house. However, she never made it home, vanishing somewhere halfway from the stop to her apartment. Georgina Krueger was never seen again, neither alive nor deceased. Search for the missing schoolgirl. By 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the grandmother, who was waiting for the granddaughters to return from school, had prepared lunch and set the table. Georgina was supposed to return first, and Michelle a bit later, since she had additional classes at the music school that day. But the older granddaughter did not show up, which was very strange because she was eagerly awaiting the call and had no plans to stay out. When Michelle arrived home at 3 o'clock, the grandmother grew anxious and started calling Gina to find out where she had vanished, but the schoolgirl's phone was turned off. Subsequent attempts to reach her also failed. The anxiety grew, and when Vesna returned from work and learned that her daughter was missing and her mobile was unreachable, she realized something serious had happened. The first thing the mother did was call the school, where she was informed that Krueger had attended all her classes and had left by bus as usual. Then the woman contacted several of her daughter's friends, hoping that the girls had simply got caught up talking or had stopped at the cafe on their way home, but they said that Georgina was in a hurry and had headed straight home. The concerned women then went to the police station and reported the disappearance of the 14-year-old girl. However, the law enforcement initially took a skeptical view, suspecting that the schoolgirl might have gone on a date, visited someone among friends, or had an argument with a classmate and was sulking alone somewhere in a park. After exhausting all possible scenarios and verifying that the teenager was nowhere to be found in any of the anticipated locations, detectives began checking reports of accidents and calling hospitals, assuming that the girl might have encountered trouble, suffered an injury, or been harmed on her way home from school. But Gina had not been admitted to any hospital either. As the night approached, extensive searches and witness interviews began. The schoolgirl was dressed in blue jeans with wear marks, a light blue t-shirt, a denim jacket, and gray sneakers. She carried a pink sports bag with a long, wide strap, which contained her notebooks, textbooks, and her mobile phone. Investigators were able to track the girl's movements through her device's signal. She indeed spent the entire day at school, then boarded the bus and got off at her stop. But approximately halfway to her home, the signal suddenly disappeared and never reappeared. The search began on Stendhal Street, where the Krueger family lived. A search team with dogs trained to detect the scent of living or deceased humans was dispatched there. At that point, there was still hope of finding the teenage girl alive and unharmed. Vanished into thin air. Law enforcement checked every home, interviewed all residents and potential witnesses, inspected attics and basements, spoke with workers at local stores and cafes, but no one had seen Georgina, and even dogs could not pick up her trail. By the next morning, flyers with the schoolgirl's photos and requests for any information about her had been posted all over the city. Dozens of calls came into the police station reporting sightings of a similar-looking girl in different parts of the city, but unfortunately, all leads turned out to be false. Concurrently, investigators began to follow up on all previously convicted local residents, as well as those who had been released on bail. Special attention was given to criminals and those who had shown an unhealthy interest in minors. However, all these efforts yielded no results. The schoolgirl seemed to have vanished into thin air, not making it home. No traces or personal belongings were found, as if she had never existed at all. False lead. After several months of fruitless searching, the investigation was suspended as there were no leads, not a single clue, and no idea which direction to pursue. However, about a year after Georgina's disappearance, an anonymous call came into the police station, with the unknown caller claiming that the girl's body rested at the bottom of a nearby lake. Authorities were unable to identify the caller, but they clung to this piece of information and decided to investigate it. For several weeks, highly skilled divers combed the lake bed using advanced equipment. It can be said with certainty that they examined virtually every inch, but found no trace of Krueger. The lead turned out to be false, but it nevertheless rekindled public interest in the case. The media actively discussed and wrote about the missing girl again, so it was decided to conduct another search operation. The police re-interviewed neighbors and brought in search dogs, although it was clear that this would likely yield no results. The dogs had been unable to pick up the girl's scent on the day of her disappearance, so there was little hope for success after a whole year. Investigators were confident that the schoolgirl was no longer alive, but the Krueger family members refused to believe this. Vesna concocted a legend for herself, according to which her daughter had run away to India and was now starring in Bollywood films, dancing and singing as she had always dreamed. The woman consoled herself with these thoughts and continued to live for the sake of her younger daughter. The monster next door. Search efforts periodically resumed, and in 2016, nearly a decade after a girl's disappearance, a resident of Stendhal Street contacted the police to complain about a neighbor who was actively inviting underage girls over to his place. This neighbor turned out to be a 35-year-old immigrant from Turkey named Ali K. He was legally married, raising 3 children, and tried to appear as an exemplary family man to those around him, but in reality, he was not. Upon closer inspection of Ali, and after studying his personality, the police were horrified, as 4 years prior, he had already been under investigation. At that time, he deceitfully lured a local schoolgirl, promising to sell her a trendy smartphone at a symbolic price. He took the girl to his storeroom, located in the basement of the apartment building, struck her on the head, and coerced her into intimate closeness. Afterward, he made the teenager swear she wouldn't tell anyone about what happened, then gave her a paper napkin to wipe her tears, and helped her tidy up. The girl promised to remain silent just to escape from the clutches of the monster, but as soon as she was free, she immediately told her parents about the incident, and together they went to the police to report the violent actions. The schoolgirl detailed the man's storeroom in the basement, noting that it looked more like a maniac's den. Ali was arrested the same day, but he vehemently denied his guilt and shared his own version of the events. According to him, he was indeed selling the gadget, and the girl herself expressed a desire to buy it. As the smartphone was in his basement storeroom, they went down together, and when the guest examined the device, she said that she had always dreamed of such a gadget, but since she didn't have the money, she was ready to pay in another way. Following this, according to Ali, the girl began kissing him and started undressing, and he, trying to reason with her, pushed her away forcefully, causing her to fall and hit her head. This explained the injury and bruises on her body, but the fact of intimate closeness could not be proven as the man had used a contraceptive, which he later disposed of. Ali's wife, Melik, fully supported her husband, and also began accusing the girl of indecent behavior and attempts to seduce her husband. Ultimately, The man only received a suspended sentence for causing moderate bodily harm. Nonetheless, now as the police took up the investigation of the disappearance of Krueger again, they decided to check him thoroughly once more. Allie K did not have a permanent job and got by on odd jobs, mainly living on benefits. He loved gambling and often incurred debts, was a regular visitor to the Turkish coffee shop on the ground floor of his building, where he made acquaintances with different people who treated him to food and drinks. The man carefully maintained his appearance, desperately trying to look younger than his years. He wore fashionable clothes, sometimes even spending children's benefits on them. But the main oddity about this man was his attraction to girls. He continually tried to meet teenagers, ask them inappropriate questions, and also offered strange and illegal things, for instance, help with buying alcohol or cigarettes. Ali most resembled the role of Georgina's abductor, but the police had nothing against him in this case. New investigation. Nevertheless, the Krueger case was reopened, and a new investigation was initiated due to the emergence of a new suspect. Ali K was brought to the station and questioned, but he naturally denied any involvement in the decade-old case. His storage room in the basement was inspected, but no traces of the missing schoolgirl were found. Detectives noted that this space indeed seemed more like a meeting place than a storage area. It turned out that 10 years ago, he had been questioned along with other neighbors, and his basement had been inspected. But specifically, Ali's storage room had not been checked because, firstly, there was no reason to, and secondly, according to residents, the door always had a lock, so only the owner could access it. Ali himself had been an active participant in the search operation at that time and was one of its most engaged members. Despite the fact that the police had nothing concrete to charge K with, they decided to keep him under surveillance to learn as much as possible about him. Unofficial monitoring was organized, and all his phone calls were intercepted. Soon, this provided initial results, and detectives discovered that the man had significant debts unknown to his wife. He had lost about 10,000 euros in poker and had no idea how to get out of this predicament. The investigation decided to focus on this aspect. Undercover agents. The decision was made to introduce an undercover agent into the suspect's close circle, who was expected to gain his trust, extract the necessary information, and secure an on-record confession. However, everything had to be done slowly and carefully so the suspect wouldn't become suspicious and would feel secure. For this purpose, a special agent codenamed Hakan was prepared and sent in, posing as a successful businessman who had recently moved to the Moabit area to open a car service station. A couple of times he visited the cafe in Ali's building, where he loudly discussed business plans.
After these words, the second man left, and Hakan stayed to finish his coffee, when suddenly Ali approached and sat at his table. He took the bait and immediately offered himself for the manager position. A conversation ensued, which quickly turned into a casual chat, and the businessman noted that Ali might fit the role, then mentioned the salary. Ali's eyes lit up at the figure. He began dreaming of paying off his debts and buying the sports car he had always wanted. The men exchanged phone numbers, and from that day on, they began to communicate regularly, and their relationship quickly grew into a friendship. Hakan even started taking Ali on business trips to other cities, aiming to get closer to him and gain his trust. But this friendship had the opposite effect, as the suspect strived to appear as the best version of himself to his prospective employer. He boasted of his achievements, even the most minor ones, and preferred to keep silent about any wrongful acts. Several months later, realizing that the case was not progressing, the investigation decided to introduce another agent, this time a woman who would play Hakan's girlfriend. This introduced Susan into the story, whose goal was to befriend Ali's wife, Melek, and try to uncover any secrets the husband might be keeping. It only took a few meetings for them to get along, after which all four started socializing as families. Melek was a sociable woman, but regarded her husband as nearly a saint. For years she had turned a blind eye to his infidelities, did not believe the schoolgirl who accused him of violence, and was convinced that her husband was a very good person, just unlucky with jobs. But now everything would change. Soon, Susan realized that Ali's wife wasn't just covering for him. She truly believed that he was simply incapable of harming anyone. The agents even decided to use a trick by spreading a rumor that there was progress in the Krueger case and an unnamed source had indicated where to find her body. Hakan left a newspaper with this article in his car, which Ali had started borrowing occasionally. Several cameras and recording devices were also installed in this car. When the suspect and his wife got into the car, she soon noticed the newspaper left behind, quickly skimmed the article, showed a bit of surprise that the case was still being investigated, and then indifferently put the paper aside. It became clear that Malek knew nothing about this. Otherwise, she would have inadvertently revealed herself. Good cop, bad cop. 6 months later, the investigation finally concluded that their plan had failed. The K family had become friends with the agents, even trusting them to look after their children, but no confessions were forthcoming. Ali strived to appear honest and upright, and his wife was simply unaware of the crime her husband had committed. Moreover, maintaining their cover was becoming increasingly expensive. They even had to lease a space for the supposed auto repair shop and signed a sham employment contract with the man to avoid raising his suspicions. The investigation then took a desperate last step.
In November 2017, sitting in the agent's car, the men discussed the plan to eliminate his nuisance girlfriend. At one point, Clore doubted whether Ali was capable of taking a life. In response, Ali revealed something he claimed no one else knew. He confessed that more than 11 years ago, he had taken a life of someone with his bare hands. Ali said that in 2006, a stunning young girl had moved onto his street, who completely captivated him. She passed by his house twice a day on her way to and from school, so he had memorized her schedule and would step out to greet her and pay compliments. Despite her young age, he described her as hot, and he burned with desire for her. One warm September day, when the girl was returning from school and the street was unusually quiet and deserted, Ali saw his chance. He asked a neighbor girl to help him move some items from his storage area, and she kindly agreed, not sensing any danger. Once they were in the basement, he locked the door and tried to kiss the schoolgirl, who struggled and screamed. He then knocked her unconscious with a blow to the head and took advantage of her. After the incident, afraid she might report him to the police, he decided not to let her go. He grabbed her throat with his hands and squeezed as hard as he could. Ali described the process in detail, explaining how he felt the crunch and sensed the pulse in her neck fade away. The girl's body lay in the basement for several days, so if the search team had looked into his storage area, they would have immediately uncovered the perpetrator. But no one suspected anything, and once the commotion had died down, he wrapped the body in an old rug and disposed of it in a garbage bin, which went directly to the landfill. Ali's confessions were recorded on a camera installed in Core's car, and by the evening of that same day, he was taken into custody. Unfortunately, the girl's remains were never found, as the waste of a landfill was regularly incinerated, and her body was essentially cremated. The trial and verdict. The hearings in this case lasted another 2.5 years before a final verdict was delivered to the criminal. He adamantly denied any wrongdoing, claiming that he had fabricated the entire story to gain Cora's trust. But in reality, he planned to rescue his girlfriend by turning in his friend to the police as soon as he received the money. No other evidence was found besides the criminal's own confession. However, his detailed and vivid account was enough to convince the jury of this man's guilt. In March 2020, nearly 14 years after Georgina's disappearance, Ali K was sentenced to life imprisonment with no possibility of ever being released. His wife, Melek, never believed in her husband's guilt, convinced that he had implicated himself while pursuing a noble cause. Greetings, everyone. Welcome to my channel. Today, we're faced with another unfortunate case. On November 6, 2014, Mexico City police officers found human remains. A part of the torso was found in a vacant lot near the exit from the city. A few days later, bags with arms and legs were found in different parts of the capital. The horrifying fact was the absence of fingers on the limbs. The police sounded the alarm. Apparently, a particularly violent criminal was at work in the region. Squads of officers were assembled and combed the streets. The main goal was to find the head and limbs of the unfortunate man and prevent further crimes. At that moment, everyone was sure that this case was the work of a brutal serial killer. The fingers and head were never found. However, thanks to the professional work of forensic experts, it was determined that the remains belonged to the same person. But due to the absence of fingers and teeth, it was impossible to find out who this person was. The story unfolds in North America. The main character, a resident of Mexico City, Alejandra Lafuente, a searing brunette with gorgeous hair and bright brown eyes, which further emphasized the thick black as tar lashes. She had an athletic, trim figure, which she tried to maintain by practicing fitness, yoga, and breathing exercises. Alejandra loved to take care of herself. She could often be found at a beauty salon, massage, or spa. In warm weather, she lounged on the beach doing scientific work, and on cloudy days she could visit tanning salons. In general, we can say that the young woman loved herself very much and considered herself the standard of female attractiveness. Alejandra did not lag behind in terms of career. Her father is a doctor of sciences, a famous psychiatrist, Alberto da Fuente. He is a luminary of science, deals with such deviations of the psyche, such as schizophrenia and manic disorders, and he is famous not only for his scientific work, but also for his experiments on patients. For Alejandra, her father was an idol. Wanting to achieve the same success, she followed in his footsteps. To do so, she enrolled in the best university for psychiatry and graduated with honors. Her perseverance, resourcefulness, extraordinary intelligence, as well as her father's connections, helped her to write and defend her thesis on manic syndrome. However, in the future, psychiatry, Alejandra did not become engaged in psychiatry. She was attracted by the work of a psychotherapist. Thanks to her father's money, the young woman got a license and opened her office in a new business center in the heart of the capital. There was no shortage of clients, but she only saw women. Women with eating disorders, depression, relationship problems, and low self-esteem came for counseling. Alejandra helped to solve family problems, but as it often happens, her personal life left much to be desired. The young woman's first marriage broke up, but in the end, the couple had 2 children. 2 charming girls with Alejandra's eyes and her father's sense of humor. However, Alejandra was not discouraged. In her opinion, 2 children were no reason to give up on herself. She still dreamed of meeting her other half, a man who could also be a good father to her daughters. Sometime after the couple separated, the ex-husband, whose name is not disclosed, came home to Alejandra. It was a normal practice for the couple. The man would come on weekends to give time to his little girls and help his ex-wife with household chores if needed. However, the ex-husband had no idea that this visit would turn out to be his last. Alejandra asked him to enter the house through the backyard, reasoning that the lock on the front door was jammed. The man made his way into the house. Alejandra said that her youngest daughter was bathing right now and asked him to come into her bathroom. Suspecting nothing, the man went in there. There was a ringing silence in the house. There were no sounds, the usual cartoons, the laughter of children. The man went into the bathroom. There was tape on the floor, and there was no daughter in the filled bathtub. He began to realize that something was going wrong. Right at that second, his ex-wife stood behind him with a hammer and delivered a blow with all her might to his head. Then another one. The man fell. Blood was pouring out of the gaping hole in his skull. Everything around him was covered in blood. As the experts later found out, the man had no chance to save himself. Death occurred almost instantly after the first blow with a heavy blunt object. The eldest daughter, who unexpectedly returned early from a friend, became an unwitting witness to this truly horrifying picture. The children often observed their parents' quarrels. Alejandra was determined to be mentally disturbed. She often took it out on her friends. Friends even noticed how the young woman could hit her husband. They often noticed scratches on his arms and neck. As for the housemates, they constantly observed her tantrums in an even place and inadequate behavior. But this time the situation got out of control. The daughter ran out of the house and began to call for help. Almost immediately, a neighbor came running, who then called the police squad. The psychologist was arrested and charged with murder. At the station, the young woman was placed in a cell, where she had to stay for a month until her first hearing. At the trial, Alejandra denied her guilt. Lawyers put forward a version of self-defense. According to them, the ex-husband was intensely jealous of Alejandra and made up that she was bringing men into the house, which could negatively affect the psyche of little girls. On the day of the crime, he showed up unplanned at his ex-wife's house, went through the back door, hoping to catch his wife with another man. Then he pounced on Alejandra, who was in the bathroom at the time trying to put together a nightstand. She then had to exert self-defense, in which she delivered 2 blows to the back of her ex-husband's head. On June 14, 2012, the sentence was handed down. Taking into account the evidence provided by the defense in the presence of 2 minor children, Alejandra was sentenced to 1 year and 4 months. Thanks to the coordinated work of lawyers and the money of his father, the term behind bars was replaced by a suspended sentence. A couple of months later, the appeal was filed again with a request to drop the charges. The argument was assault in self-defense. Human rights activists asked for a jury trial. They felt unbearably sorry for the poor woman who was presented at trial as a victim of domestic violence. As a result, the court reviewed the case and handed down an acquittal. After her release, the young woman proceeded to provide her psychological counseling as before. She created an image of a victim of gender inequality who fought for her rights like most women in North America and finally won. This created image made Alejandra even more popular to potential clients. Soon, Maria Alejandra met Alan Carrera Cuela, a large Mexican businessman, the son of Adrian Carrera Francis. He was a tall, handsome, and statuesque man. His father had previously been head of special services for the Central District and had achieved considerable success in his career. Soon, Alan expanded his business and created a whole chain of construction stores that began to open all over the country. Part of Alan's business was legalized, but the other part, which few people knew about, was closely connected with crime. By the way, it was for this reason that his father was removed from his position when one of his son's financial frauds was uncovered. In addition, Alan had a stake in a criminal group that was engaged in the transportation of psychotropic substances to the United States. Their base was located in a border town and was guarded by purchased police officers. This group controlled a small portion of the trafficking of psychoactive substances in the South. Alan's father was proven to be involved in his son's affairs. The police managed to get a statement out of him, so he was facing a 20-year prison sentence. But on July 18, 2000, Adrian Carrera was released early thanks to the Witness Protection Program. Immediately after his release, he devoted all his time to his son and his legitimate business. The son grew up quickly, adopting his father's views and experiences. After graduating from college, Alan Carrera decided to follow in his father's footsteps and became an entrepreneur. He was very interested in the store of household appliances, which, despite his young years, he completely led himself. This business was not as large as his father's, but it brought good money. There were always a lot of women around him, but Alan from childhood was in love with a classmate, whom he took as his wife, smart, beautiful, from a good family. The marriage was short, but bright.
Daddy had a beautiful daughter. However, a lot of work and almost total absence of Alan at home led this marriage to divorce. Alan was extremely hard to part with the woman he loved since high school. New novels did not bring pleasure, and loneliness and sadness led to the fact that the man began to drink. Gradually, this grew into a pernicious habit. In an attempt to cope with prolonged depression and love for alcohol, Alan tried many ways: books, AA circles, drips. Until one day, fate did not lead the man to a consultation with the famous psychiatrist Alberto, the father of Maria Alejandra. Alan's now ex-wife was also going through a difficult divorce. Alan was the only man in the young woman's life, and despite the separation, she could not allow anyone else to her. To somehow get rid of her loneliness, Alan's ex-wife also decided to visit a therapist. The psychiatrist, with whom Alan was rehabilitated, explained that he could not lead both spouses for ethical reasons, and therefore recommended the woman to turn to Alejandra. However, it is worth noting that he did not inform the clients that Alejandra was his daughter. Alejandra quickly realized that her patient's ex-husband could be a great match. He was said to be a pleasant man in the prime of life, and quite wealthy. Not thinking long, Alejandra asked her client to bring her ex-husband for another consultation. According to the therapist, she would be able to solve their problem in one session and break the strong bond between the former spouses. From the very first minutes of the steamy session, Alejandra began to put her plan to seduce the entrepreneur into action. The result did not wait long. Immediately after the session, Alan offered the therapist a cup of coffee to discuss family problems. For propriety, the young woman at first even refused to go on a date, because it was contrary to medical ethics. But the date took place the same evening. Between them quite quickly spun an affair. Soon Alan's ex-wife found out about it. She was shocked. She even wanted to report the incident to the doctor's ethics committee, but she didn't. Alejandra was a very competent specialist, and therefore was able to convince her client to let the situation go. After all, it says jealousy and unwillingness to let go of the former spouse, and so, according to the doctor, a happy future will not work. In the commission, Alan's ex-wife decided not to apply, but also with the sessions were over. Meanwhile, the relationship with the newly married couple developed quite rapidly. A few months after the first date, the young people decided to live together. After 2 more months, they decided to legalize their relationship. But Alan did not even suspect what skeletons in his closet hides his fiancée and what were the reasons for divorcing her ex-husband. In April 2014, Alan decided to visit his parents and flew to them for the weekend. It became a great occasion to talk about his beloved and the imminent wedding. Alan's parents were extremely surprised that they would find out such important things so late. They had never heard of Alejandra in their son's life before, which was very strange. A week after the meeting with the parents, the marriage was registered. Interestingly, Alejandra asked her husband not to call her friends and relatives. Invitations were not sent. The wedding was supposed to be modest, and the budget did not allow inviting everyone one would have liked. However, as it later turned out, the bride's father did attend the marriage ceremony. At first, the life of the young family seemed like a fairy tale. Young, happy with a huge number of plans and desires. But it did not last long. Alejandra could not hide her hysterical character. Approach the horrifying denouement of this story, but no one suspects it yet. The relationship between the newlyweds began to change dramatically. Alan was a rather secretive person, and with friends, details of personal life did not share. Therefore, about what was happening behind the closed doors of the couple, little was known. However, it was obvious that the former relationship gave a crack, and the couple no longer seemed so happy. After meeting Alejandra, Alan distanced himself from his family. The last straw was the wedding, to which parents were not invited. After that, they even stopped calling each other. Alan's remaining buddies began to notice that his spouse became more nervous, sometimes behaving inadequately and quickly losing her temper. After a couple of such incidents, Alan was very ashamed and decided to minimize joint meetings. Quarrels in the family occurred on a daily basis and almost always unfounded. One evening, Alejandra, by her own testimony, decided to get into her husband's cell phone. As is usually the case, correspondence with some women was discovered, with quite racy content. Of course, it was impossible to turn a blind eye to such things. According to Alejandra, this was the last straw. She reported in court that her husband beat her, insulted and humiliated her in every possible way. When cheating was also discovered, it was pointless to save this marriage. For unknown reasons, Alejandra did not apply traditional methods of psychotherapy and try to save the relationship. Having thought of her husband's cheating, the young woman decided to deal with Alan with a method already known to her. As soon as she made this decision, all her attention could be focused on creating the perfect murder plan. Meanwhile, Alan continued his usual and measured rhythm of life. He didn't even realize what was in store for him. Alan still rarely communicated with his family, but he could not miss the traditional feast, which the family held annually in honor of his beloved grandfather's birthday. Alan, of course, came to the feast, but his parents made it clear that his wife, not the most welcome guest in their house. This situation pissed Alejandra off and further aggravated the relationship in the couple. Was it possible to imagine that this would be the last time the family saw Alan alive? On October 31, 2014, Alan's phone was last used to send a text message to his family that he had reached home safely after his birthday party. He has not been in touch since then. He hadn't been seen at work for a few days either, which was quite strange because it had never happened before. The entrepreneur was extremely responsible for his work, and soon the launch of a new store was expected, and the presence of the head was simply necessary.
The reason for this was a terrifying plan of the spouse, which she put into action. After Alan returned from the holiday, there was another scandal, after which Alejandra decided to immediately dispose of her husband. She added a powerful sleeping pill to the milk he traditionally drank before going to bed. Then she smothered him with a pillow. She enjoyed watching her husband slowly lose consciousness in a pathetic attempt to remove the pillow and take a breath. Then came the hardest part, getting rid of the body. It was a moment she hadn't had time to plan for. Alan was too heavy, so she had to make do with what she had. Time was short, so Alejandra ran to the neighbor's vegetable garden to get an electric saw. With a grim smile on her face, she sawed her husband's body into pieces. Only a true sadist could do such a thing. Then she packed the body parts into garbage bags and had the foresight to cut off fingers and pull teeth. It was these that would help the investigation in identifying the person, in case the body was found. Alejandra stuffed all the bags into suitcases so that she could remove the corpse from the house without suspicion, but she did not succeed. As dawn approached, Alejandra was unable to leave the house with the suitcase unnoticed. An elderly neighbor, who suffered from insomnia, watched her from her window. She was a little alarmed by the young woman's early departure. Besides, for some reason, her husband did not help to lift the heavier suitcases. And Alejandra was behaving very strangely. She was always looking around. At dawn, Alejandra returned home. This surprised the vigilant neighbor even more. As it would later turn out, she had scattered bags of her ex-husband's remains in different neighborhoods to cover her tracks. As the new day dawned, she went on with her normal life. On November 6, 2014, Mexican police officers discovered the first horrifying find, a human torso with no teeth and no fingers on the hand. The entire police force was put on alert as the incident was egregious in its level of brutality. Less than a day later, other body parts were found in various parts of the city. It is also interesting that the distance between the places where the packages were found was quite significant. Later, this is what would be attributed to Alejandra's long absence from home. All the body parts were sent to the best forensic laboratory, where experts quickly established the fact that all the parts belonged to the same person. In order to avert suspicion from herself, the perpetrator started writing messages to Alan's relatives. She wanted to avert suspicion, but she only made things worse. She didn't even know that her husband had recently distanced himself from the family and had no contact with his relatives. Alejandra informed Alan's parents on his behalf that they were going on vacation and would be out of touch. The whole plan was ruined by Alejandra's father. Alberto began making phone calls to Alan's father's house. He wanted to clarify if his son-in-law's family knew Alejandra's location. Alberto hadn't heard from her in a while, and the patients are very worried about not being able to attend counseling sessions. Later, he calls Alan's relatives again to inform them that his daughter has been found and that she had to be forcibly admitted to the clinic because she is suffering from depression due to her husband's cheating. This greatly frightened the relatives, and they tried to find Alan, but all was unsuccessful, and then the family of the businessman turned to the police. The laboratory experts decided to compare the remains of the corpse recently found with Alan's characteristics. The similarity was 100%, and his relatives also identified him. It was especially hard for Alan's grandfather. Soon after the identification, he became ill with heart disease because it was his only grandson. The investigation issued a search warrant for Alan's home and office. A hillock of fresh earth was found in the backyard of the house. After digging, the man's fingers and teeth were discovered. The find further shocked the capital city. Alejandra was immediately apprehended. Traces of blood were also found in one of the rooms, as well as on the trunk of the car and in the garage. At first, Alejandra tried to deny her guilt. She hoped that she would be able to get away with it with impunity, as she had with her previous husband. But the investigation quickly sorted out the case. The testimony of an elderly witness helped. The time she gave coincided with Alan's estimated time of death. Alejandra used her position to obtain a powerful sleeping pill, a kind of drug only a doctor could get his hands on.
This further aggravated the case. The evidence obtained helped establish a link between Alejandra and the brutal massacre of her husband. CCTV cameras also helped trace that the man had gone into the house and never came out of the house again. The fact that the suitcases were taken out was also confirmed by CCTV footage. On December 10, 2014, the jury reached a verdict. Alejandra was sentenced to life imprisonment. Murder with brutality, an attempt to conceal this fact, the use of official position, all this was not in favor of the former psychotherapist. Her father, who through the use of connections and bribes tried to spare his daughter from imprisonment, could not help either. But all he managed to do was to keep the trial closed to the public and the press in order to avoid more publicity. However, he did it all for the sake of his own career. Now hardly anyone else will turn to a specialist who raised such a ruthless monster and could not diagnose problems in time with his own daughter. The case of the death of Alejandra's first husband also came to mind at the trial. However, due to the passage of years, the evidence in this case was not found. The version of Alejandra's father's involvement in what happened was also considered. There were suspicions that he was in collusion with his daughter, and they committed crimes on the basis of scientific interest. However, this idea found no evidence. After several appeals from the victims, the sentence was commuted to death. This is an unprecedented situation. Such sentences are extremely rare in Mexico, especially in these times. The defendant is also not entitled to a review of the case. The house and all the property of the accused must go to the family of the victim, although who can be comforted by this if the person can no longer be brought back? Apparently, Alejandra was a pragmatic and cruel woman. She had major mental health issues, although medical examinations denied that she had any. She also harbored the influence of her father and used her official position to carry out her manic plans. Impunity after her first crime had only unleashed her. Alejandra felt invulnerable and continued to do evil. Perhaps Alan would still be alive if this horrible woman had not been acquitted the first time, but it was too late to talk about it now.
Thank you for watching the video. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell to stay updated with our latest content.